When a person does a mitzvah, can be simple as just eating an apple or blowing the shofar or hearing the shofar. There is a concept that it's called kavanah, meaning the person needs to have the intent, the proper intent. We dealt yesterday with the issue of how far you go with that obligation. An example, when we have the concept on Rosh Hashanah, which is a biblical precept, to hear the sound of the shofar. Now, let's call them a name. You have a fellow by the name of Reuven, who is blowing the shofar, and you have Shimon and others who listen. The bracha, the blessing that we recite before blowing the shofar is, "Blessed are you, God, Master of the universe, who commanded us to hear the sound of the shofar." So the big question here is, what happened if someone asks, if Shimon asked Reuven to blow for him, and Reuven has no intent, he just do it for fun, it's like playing an instrument. Or vice versa, or Shimon heard part or full of blowing the shofar, and he's not intent to hear the blowing the shofar. So here we are on page 29, on the top of the page. אמר לרבי זרע לשמאי, יכוון ותקלי. It was a great sage by the name of Rabbi Zera. He said to his attendant, guess what? I want you to blow the shofar, but listen, you should have intent to sound the shofar on my behalf, which means in order to have me fulfill my obligation, and then blow for me. Which means, if you have a situation that Reuven intend to blow the shofar, but the Meiri said if the listener, if Shimon has no intent to hear the shofar, then he's not fulfill his obligation. Alma kasavar, mashmiya by kavanah, which means Reuven, for our scenario, who's blowing the shofar for Shimon, he has to go in the concept that we said mitzvot tzrichot kavanah. The commandment has to have the proper intent. So as long as he's not having that, it's a problem. Some Rishonim, some early rabbis said that he really disputed what Rava said, which we mentioned yesterday, that mitzvot need to have the proper intent. So the Gemarrah challenged that from something we just learned yesterday. מי קיבי האויה עובר אחורי בית הכנסת ושהבית הוא סמוך לבית הכנסת ושמע כל שופר וכל מגילה אם כיוון ליבו יצא ואם לא יצא. We explained yesterday, just review refreshing our memory. Yesterday we learned a fellow passed by the synagogue, or if he live next to the synagogue and they have services there, such as blowing the shofar, reading the Megillah, is by being in a state of hearing, even not physically being there, is that a fulfillment of his obligation or not? The answer is, it depends upon the intent. If you intend to be exempt to fulfill your obligation, you can do that even without being present physically in that building, in that room. Otherwise, not. Now, if you follow Rabbi Zera that you must have the proper intent, וכי כיוון ליבו מה יהווה, האח לא מכוון דעתי דידי. So what happened is, the one who blow the shofar, Reuven, who stand in a synagogue and blow the shofar, he is not intent to have Shimon who live next door, or to have Shimon who pass by the building. Imagine, Reuven is standing in a synagogue and he is now reading the Megillah. He is now blowing the shofar, okay? He doesn't even realize that Shimon is passing that building, or Shimon is living next door apartment or next building, and he hear that. So therefore, Reuven intend to do it for himself. Okay, and he doesn't have the idea like the shames, the shamash, the one who does that for others. doesn't realize, or doesn't intend to exempt other people or him, right? And according to Rabbi Zera, you do not fulfill the obligation if you do not have the intent in both parties. So they said, "Hacha b'shliach tzibur as kindatele kule alma." No, you talk about shliach tzibur. Shliach tzibur is like the one who go to the Ahmed, the one who represent us. So he is our, in our simple language, power of attorney, right? He goes on our behalf to speak to Hashem, right? So he's blowing the shofar. He included anybody and everybody who's there. That's it. So if you pass by the building or you hear that, it's good enough, right? Because he intends to exempt everyone. Tashma, so he challenged us from another source. We learned yesterday, נתכוון שומע ולא נתכוון משמיע. נתכוון משמיע ולא נתכוון שומע לא יצא. עד שהתכוון שומע ומשמיע. Here, I must say, before we continue, there is a book called Hagaot, a Russian book. It's a great rabbi in city called Russian book, that he have two avenues to explain it. So I just try to drive in between them. The first one is the proof for Rabbi Zera, which means if you have one party, Reuven intent and Shimon not, meaning he intend to fulfill the mitzvah, but the other party not, and vice versa. So he said not until both parties have the intent. קטנה משמיע דומי לשומע, מה שומע שומע לעצמו, אף משמיע משמיע לעצמו, וקטנה לא יצא. So you see here a contradiction. One place you said is not fulfilled, another place you say it is. So the Gemarrah said, Tanaihi, is this depend upon Tanaic disputation, which is the Tanya שומע שומע לעצמו, ומשמיע משמיע לפי דרכו. If someone he is listening for himself, and the one who's blowing it, he's doing it like in a natural way, and he doesn't have to have the intent. Reuven doesn't have the intent to exempt Shimon, and Shimon by just have the intent and listening, that's enough. אמר רבי יוסי, באמת דברים ברורים בשליח ציבור, אבל ביחיד לא יצא שכיוון שומע ומשמיע. So in short, what he said here, and again I'm driving between two pshatim in Maharal Russian book, is the idea that you have to differentiate between shliach tzibur, between one who represent everyone. So he is going there, everyone and anyone is exempt as long as you hear it, regardless if you have the intent. For sure lechatchila it's better, versus if it's individual, that's a different story. In the individual you have to make sure that both parties hear it and have the intent and blow it and know that I am Reuven, I intend to blow the shofar not only for myself but also to exempt Shimon. Shimon have to remember that I have to intend not only to hear the shofar but also to fulfill my obligation by the proper intent of hearing to fulfill the mitzvah. Speak about the kavanah, the intent with blowing the shofar. So now we elaborate on that. I'm going by the explanation of the Bar Tenura, the famous commentator on the Mishnah, and the Maharsha. They said that since the previous Mishnah said, Im kiven libo yatsa, if a person have the proper intent to fulfill his obligation, if not, so now we continue the same way. The Torah tells us, is a famous statement, when it was the war with Amalek, they attack our nation in the place called Refidim. The Torah said in the book of Shmot, Exodus chapter 17, the story that Moses went up and he carried his hand up at the top of the mountain, he carried his hand up, and the Torah said, "V'haya kasher im Moshe yado v'gavar Israel," meaning as long as Moses lifted up his hand, the nation won the war against the Amalek. Versus when his hand down, it was the other way around. So in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, chapter 60, Siman Samech, it's a very big disputation. What's the real proper halacha? Mitzvot need to have kavanah or not? The ruling is yes. When you do a mitzvah, you need to have the proper intent. The question is, what exactly you meant by saying kavanah? What is the idea of kavanah? So they said, "V'chi yadav shel Moshe osot milchama shovot milchama." There are 2 points here. Number one, we are not of the Avodah Zarah, we are not idol worshippers. So what does that mean by saying that his hand is up, his hand is down? Number two, are you going to tell me that it's depend upon Moshe Rabbeinu? It's depend on Moses? He can't, that's not Judaism. That when he put his hand, lift his hand. So אלא לומר לך, כל זמן שהיו ישראל מסתכלים כלפי מעלה ומשעבדים את ליבם לאבינו שבשמיים ומתגברים, אליו היו נופלים. So the Maharsha said that the point is, when Moses went on the top of the mountain and he lifted up his hand, so he called it semel be'alma. It's a symbol for the people. It's a opportunity for people to wake up their souls. So the moment they see it, they subjugate their heart to God in heaven. So it's not the person, it's not the entity, and it's not the mountain. כיוצא בדבר אתה אומר, עשה לך שרה ושים אותו על נס, והיה כולן נשוך וראה אותו וחי. The Torah tells us, it's connected to our Torah portion, right? The Torah said in the book of Bamidbar, chapter 21, that people complain, and as a result they have this Scorpio, and the Scorpio bite them, etc., etc. So since they complain, it's a lack of hakarat hatov, lack of gratitude for all the good that Hashem did it. So they ask, יעשה לך שרף, ושים אותו על נס. נס is like מות גבוה, it's a large pillar, large stick. So וכי נחש, ממית ונחש מחיה, נחש נחושת. This one make out of copper, the Scorpio. Is that the one who make you alive when you look, or make you the other one around, kill you? אלא בזמן שישראל מסתכלים כלפי מעלה משעבדים את ליבם בשם השמיים ומתרפים. That applies when the people of Israel, they look at that, and the Zohar explained that they subjugate the heart to God. Then God created that situation. היו מתרפים, they are healed. ואם לאו היו נימוקים, so otherwise they died. But it's the Scorpio was a tool to fulfill what God is basically doing. Now we're going back to the whole concept of hearing the sound of the shofar in order to fulfill the mitzvah. חירש, שוטה וקטן, that is not considering bar da'at, all these three. So basically חירש is someone who cannot hear. שוטה, it's someone who is imbecile. Imbecile, thank you. And the third one is katan, is a minor. So who sound the shofar cannot, אין מוצאים את הרבים, they cannot discharge the obligation on behalf of the community. Why? זה הכלל, כל שלום בך, ודבר לא מוצאים את הדברים הרבים מדי חובתם. In order to fulfill the obligation, you have to be chayav, you have to be obligated in that. Otherwise, you cannot exempt others. So there's a disputation among the Rishonim, what exactly the definition of that mitzvah, of obligation to hear the shofar. The Rambam, at the first chapter in Hilchot Shofar, the first phase that he said, the blowing of the shofar, it's the hechsher mitzvah, is the paving the way to do mitzvah. So the reason we said lishmoa kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar, and we don't say Baruch Atah Hashem etc. litkoa bashofar, because he said this is the same as you do leishev basukah. Blessed are you, God, to dwell in the sukkah, and not, we don't make a blessing la'asot sukkah, to prepare the sukkah. So it means that he explained that the whole concept is to wake up the soul, to do teshuvah, and to appease God in a day of judgment. So this centerpiece of the mitzvah is to hear. Rabbeinu Tam explained, the Rosh brought him, he said that the idea is that the fulfillment of the Tkiyat Shofar is not just the blessing, is the combination of both, which means to hear, but after you hear and you bless, blow the shofar. So it means the Shagat Ari explained it in Siman Vav in chapter 6. He explained that there is a whole concept here of someone who blow the shofar, for example, as an instrument for fun, or if you hear it from someone who is a minor, or someone who is not obligated by any means. So it's not considering a kol shofar, and the Chazon Ish elaborated on that in Orach Chaim Kaftet, and he said that it's in a sense is like you go to a concert and hear someone, or you just enjoy someone does something with the instrument, but it's not an fulfillment of obligation because they themselves, as we said earlier, are not obligated. So since they're not obligated, they cannot exempt others who are obligated. תנו רבנן, הכל חייבים בתקיעת שופר, כהנים לוויים ולישראלים, גרים ועבדים ומשוחררים. So here Tosfot elaborated that, but I mean not in this place, but in other, in Tractate Erkin, one phase is apply even the minor that reach the age of chinuch, but the idea is everyone, Kohanim, Leviyim, Israelim, in regard to lineage, ענייני ייחוס, is also עבדים משוחררים, וטומטום והדרוגינוס, there are people who are half male, half female, the body shows both, etc. ומי שחציו עבד וחציו בן חורין, one is a half a servant, one half a freeman. So they said, טומטום אינו מוציא לו את מינו ולא את שאינו מינו. Since it's a mixture, he cannot exempt neither people who are the same as him, and for sure people who are not the same as him. Androgynos מוציא את מינו ולא את שאינו מינו. However, androgynos, it's a different story. He can exempt. How do you say it in your English books? What is called androgynous? Someone tell me.
The sex organs are not completely recognized.
But how you call it in English?
A hermaphrodite.
Hermaphrodite or androgen. And
so anyway,
androgynous.
Yeah. So the second category, he can exempt his kind of category, but not avalot she'eno mino. ומי שחציו עבד וחציו בן חורין, אינו מוציא לו את מינו ולא את שמינו. If someone is a half a servant, half a free, so you have a half category בהלכה. So therefore, because half of him is a servant, so we base on Gemarrah and Gittin, we learn page 41. So therefore, he cannot exempt neither one. אמר מר. הכל חייבים בתקיעת שופר, כהנים ולוויים ישראלים. פשיטה, that's obvious. יעני לא מחייב ומה הם מחייבני? If they are not, who are the people who have the obligation? כהנים הצליחה להיסגל לדרך המנו לכתוב יום תורה אליכם, since the Torah said במדבר, that this is a day of blood in the shofar, man דלית לילה בתקיעת אחד יום, הוא דמחייב. So maybe you think that that's apply only the people who are obligated on that day, that particular day. But the Hani Kohanim only betnunim betkiol kol hashana. Since the Kohanim involved with blowing the shofar all year round, so the Kohanim have the mitzvah to blow the shofar not only on our high holidays but also in a festival, in Rosh Chodesh, and other events. And it was a trumpet in the temple that was applied for the public offering and the peace offering. So it's not a Yom Teruah, a special day for them. So, you may think that that's not included the priests. They come to tell us that no, they are also part of that obligation. So that's the reason we mentioned them. So the Gemara said, how do you compare the two? How do you compare the Torah that Kohanim needs to do all year round to the one on Rosh Hashanah? It's two different categories, like mixing apple and oranges. Said Hatam, Chazotzot, ve'achal shofar. Over there they talk about trumpet, here they talk about shofar. So therefore, Yom Teruah Yichudi, it's a special, unique Yom Teruah for the Kohanim, and the question is why you mentioned Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. So they said, since we learned earlier on page 26, we said that on Yom Kippur, in a Jubilee year, it's the same as Rosh Hashanah. Meaning, since we said, we're going to learn also in Gzerah Shavah, in page 34, so Monday it mitzvah yovel to mitzvah Rosh Hashanah, and Kohanim yovel mitzvah yovel. Since the Kohanim is not obligated to in the part of the Jubilee, they're not involved with returning properties. Okay, in a Jubilee year, so you don't have the same halachic implications. So Litnan, we learn in Tractate Erkin Mishnah, page 33. Kohanim v'Levim mochrim le'olam. They sell their home as a permanent sale, whatever they wish to. They can do a redemption anytime. So maybe you think that there is a separation with the Kohanim Levim and the others, that they're not obligated also mitzvah of blowing the shofar. Kamash Melah, so the Tana tells us that also the Kohanim have to. So just to give you a vignette of Rashi, is a long one. He said here, bring the Gemarrah in Erkin 24, and he said, "Hey, מקדישים לפני ובן פחות משתי שנים ולא גואלים אחר ובן פחות משנה, תנא לגבי כהנים מקדישים וגואלים." So again, the Rashi tried to prove that we differentiate when it's come to Jubilee between Kohanim Levim and others. And since they are not the same categories, remember the other day we talked about separation of the state. And I'm talking about the future state for the tribes. So we said that the tribe of Levi did not inherit it because they involved the temple. So therefore their level of properties, ownership and transferring and redemption is very different in the category. So we tried to make it in a sense the same juxtaposition to Rosh Hashanah, and we see that it's not, it's two different entities. מי שיחוצו ולא חוצו מן חורים אינו מוציא לו את מינו ולא את שאינו מינו, אמר רב הונא הוא לעצמו מוציא, which means he can do it for himself since he cannot exempt others, but as far as part of him is free, so he can exempt himself by blowing the shofar for himself. Okay, אמר לרב נחמן לרב הונא, מה יש לאחרים לא? Why you tell me that one is a half a servant, he cannot fulfill for others? Remember, half of him is a free man. They said, לא תצטרפו ומפיק קצת חירות. So because since half of his category it's not free, so because of that he cannot exempt others. לעצמו נמי, לא תצטרפו לידם וציד חתרו. So it means that you and Rav Nachman said the same thing. So he said, למה רב נחמן אף לעצמו אינו מוציא. Also not exempt for himself, he needs to have the sound of the shofar from someone who's totally free person. Okay, so we finished that sugya, now we go to new sugya. I need to give you a little introduction. Okay, here's the introduction. We have two entities. One is called Birkat HaMitzvot and the other one is called Birkat Nehenin. What does that mean? When we have a mitzvah, such as hearing the sound of the shofar, so you have the bracha, lishmoa kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. Kiddush, as David asked, right? Kiddush, you have the mitzvah to say the Kiddush, the Kedushat Hayom. The same lulav, you have the mitzvah and you say the blessing for that. That's called Birkat HaMitzvot, a blessing to fulfill a mitzvah. One category. Now we're going to a very different category for our discussion. It's called Birkat HaNehenim, a blessing that you make for deriving joy, benefit. You eat a bread, you make hamotzi. You drink wine, you make bore pri hagafen. You eat apple, you make bore pri ha'etz. You make a blessing for deriving joy, benefit. If you remember, we studied in Tractate Brachot, the Gemarrah said, a person asur la'anot ma'olam hazeh b'lo bracha. A person cannot derive joy, benefit from this world without thanking the Lord, and therefore it's like, in a way, like stealing, because since the world belongs to God, and I am taking something, I am taking this food that God provided, I should say thank you. Otherwise, it's like in a manner of stealing. So we have two entities. One is Nehenim, driving joy, and one is Birkat HaMitzvot. Now, Birkat Mitzvot, a person can repeat as many times as he needs. Why? There is a concept that we said, Maran Sanhedrin, Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. We are all obligated, responsible to each other, for good and for the other way. So it's a big hakira, it's a big discussion among the achronim, the late rabbis. What exactly you meant to say that we are responsible for each other? Which means, I am responsible that if Gilbert did not do, for example, not hear the shofar, I am responsible to make sure that he'll hear the shofar, or it's not my responsibility. In other words, where exactly the borderline that I'm responsible or not? It's a big discussion. Good example we have, for example, at the nursing home, hospitals. We know a precious Jews that does that. They go with a Megillah on Purim from one room to another, and reads for people who are disabled or cannot come to synagogue, correct?
Right.
You have people righteous people that go on Friday night to a nursing home, hospital, other places that people are, and they make kiddush for them. And I'm emphasizing on Friday night. Now what happened is, you may end up by saying 20 times the same bracha. And you're not in any violation by repeating the bracha in the name of God and again and again and again. So birkat nehenim, they drive joy, meaning if I'm not deriving benefit or joy, I'm not making the blessing. So when it's come to someone else, and he or she needs to make a blessing bore priya etz for the apple, I cannot do it for them. So in general, as we said, we differentiate between something that I derive joy, I derive benefit, it's something I do for someone else. So blessing for the reading of the Megillah, I can say it, even I said it 10 times already, for someone else who was not capable, okay? But there is another thing that involved with me deriving benefit, I can do it only for myself. So far so good? Now, the next stage. What happens if you have a combination of both? Such as, if you have a kiddush, you need to have kiddush, so what do you have, the two entities in the kiddush? One, you said, Bore Priya Gafen, blessing for the vine, blessing for the grapes, right? And you're going to drink it. The other one, it's called Kedushat Hayom, the blessing for the day, which is the Birkat HaMitzvot, the blessing, or take for example matzah.
Right.
If you eat, I'm speaking specifically at the eve of Passover. So you have, one is the Hamotzi, which is Birkat HaNe'enin, you're going to eat it, and there's another blessing we make on the eve of Pesach, which is Al Achilat Matzah. That's a obligatory, is Birkat HaMitzvot, blessing for the mitzvah. So if I'm eating matzah, can I do it for someone else who's not eating matzah, who's just hearing the blessing, or not? It's not so simple. So let's see the discussion. That's, I think, David's intent in his question earlier, right?
Same, yeah, well, it's
okay.
Same with the obligatory part of the Kiddush.
All right.
Which is,
let's see it.
So,
two lines from the bottom.
Okay.
Tane Ahava Breder Rabbi Zera, that's the son of Rabbi Zera, he asked, Kol habrachot kulam, meaning all the Birkat HaMitzvot, Af al pi sheyatza motzi, even the person fulfilled his obligation, did it once, it's over. But since everyone is obligated for each other, he can exempt. Chutz mi birkat halechem, excluding what? The blessing for hamotzi, ubirkat hayayin, the blessing for the grapes, or the Rashi said the same applied to borei minei besamim. But anyway, sherak im lo yatsa motzi, im yatsa eno motzi. Obviously, it's you ate already bread, or you already drank wine, so that's a different story. So if you exam, you can, but if he already fulfilled his obligation, he cannot discharge the obligation of others, because these blessings are recited in appreciation of physical enjoyment, and you can do it only when you you have that pleasure. By Rava. So Rava elaborates on that dilemma, and he said, 29b, Birkat halechem shel matzah. As we said, this is the eve of Passover, not the regular Chol HaMoed days. And a person have Birkat HaNe'enim, the bracha, for eating matzah. Ubirkat hayayin shel kiddush hayom. That applies specifically in the eve of Shabbat. Mahu. What exactly the halacha? So Rashi tells us that here it's specifically with the bread and wine, but al achilat matzah mekadesh Shabbat, even he yatsa motzi, even he has already did, he can do it for others. Here is the quandary. Keivan dechovahu, since it's birkat mitzvot, it's obligatory, or dilma bracha lav chovai. So the Ritva tells us that these blessings of the bread and wine, it's not by themselves, because it's applied to all different benefits, but even he's now obligated to eat, but you treat it as a nehenim, as derivative from benefit, from joy. So therefore, if you already did it, if you already make a motzi for yourself, you cannot do it for others. Tashma, damar Rav Ashi kavina beirav papi, yav mikadesh lan. Here's an example. I tell you a true story that happened to a Rav Papi, who was a great sage. So he was make a kiddush for us, and we are all hearing his kiddush and fulfill his obligation. And then all of a sudden, midivra, he have his employees that works for late on Friday afternoon. So they came back, so he repeats it again for them. So that's, by the way, a halacha lemaaseh, which we're going to read later. But the idea is that even you already fulfill your obligation, kuf samech zayin, Shulchan Aruch, even you did it for yourself, you can also exempt for others. But the Mishnah Berurah said that that's applied only when you really eating. But if you're, for example, on a fast day, that's not applicable. Tanu Rabbanan, lo yifros adam prusa la'orchim, ela im ken ochel imayim. So you make a motzi, so you have to give everyone piece, or especially in those days, but also nowadays you see it, when you have guests in your house, the owner or the head of the house, he's doing that. So usually it's the Pusaya Fai, giving a nice portion for everyone, but that's, Gemarrah in Brachot 46 said that that's the proper manner. So a person should do that only if he's part of the feast, part of the meal. אבל פורס הוא לבניו ולבני ביתו כנחנך ממצוות. But if he is teaching his children, that's different. For the purpose of chinuch, for education, you can do it. So, ubehalel, that's when you read in the festival the Hallel. Uvamgila, when you read the poem, af al pi sheyatza motzi. So here is again is machloket. The Shagatari has said that that's apply only in the rabbinic law. But if it's the oraita, if it's biblical, yatza lo motzi. But everyone disputed Shagatari, and they said no. We follow the way here, and later we go to practical halachot. Hadran alach ra'u bet din. The last parak of the tractate Rosh Hashanah. Now we are dealing with mitzvah of the blowing the shofar Rosh Hashanah that occurred on Shabbat. Yom tov Rosh Hashanah shchalul b'Shabbat hamikdash u'tokim b'lo b'medina. So here you see machloket Rashi tells us lo b'Yerushalayim v'lo b'gvulim, which means outside of Beit Hamikdash. Nah, the Rambam disputed Rashi and he said the old Jerusalem, all Yerushalayim, is part of Beit Hamikdash. So even nowadays, b'zman hazeh midoraita, you can see it. You see people, if you go to the kotel, using lulav at that time, you see the 7 days that they hold it, it's a doraita. That's the way we learn, if you remember, Masechet Sukkah. But that's basically follow the Rambam. Mish charav Beit Hamikdash, when the second temple destroyed, hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai shutokim bechol makom sheish bo din, which means that's apply Rosh Hashanah that occur on Shabbat, any place that they have bedin. Amar Elazar hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai la be'av milvad. As you know that the bedin Sanhedrin was by force of circumstance went to Yavne, the city of Yavne, so that's only there. But other than that, no. אמרו לו, אחד יבנה אחד על כל מקום שיש בו בית דין. Makes no difference, they blow the shofar as long as they have the בית דין. ועוד את הירושלים, when the Jerusalem was in its building, יתרה על יבנה. There are more than יבנה when regards to the blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah that occurred on Shabbat. שכל עיר שהיא רואה ושומעת, any city around ירושלים, that see from that city, Yerushalayim. For example, if you live today in Mevaseret Zion, you live in Ma'ale Adunim, you can see Yerushalayim from those places, and you hear the sound of the shofar. Ukrova, v'yachol lavo, person can walk there on Shabbat, talk in, you can blow on the Shabbat, because it's considering part of the city. Ubiyavne lo tukim lebedin bilvad. When it's come to Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat, in the city of Yavne, they used to do it only in the occurrence or the bedin, and not the cities that attach to Yavne. So you see here, there are 4 different avenues understanding the Mishnah. Let's wrap it up and understand. One avenue is the Rambam. He said that even the time of Beit HaMikdash, they blow the shofar, even Yerushalayim. The second one is the Tosfot here, that he said when it was a Beit HaMikdash, they blow the shofar only Beit HaMikdash, but not in Yerushalayim and not the cities around Yerushalayim. After the destruction, they did it in Yerushalayim and the cities that attach to Yerushalayim. Then we have the third view, which is the Ritva. He said, these when the Sanhedrin was in the Yerushalayim in a place called Ishkat HaGazit, they blow the shofar only in a Beit HaMikdash, in a temple. But when they move to Yerushalayim itself, so then they blow the Yerushalayim and the cities around it. Then you have the fourth opinion, which is in Nachmanides, Ramban, who said that Yerushalayim, this is a city in the time of Beit HaMikdash, they didn't blow the shofar. But the cities attached to Yerushalayim, they did. So the Gemarrah asked, the Mishnah said, how do you know the source that you don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, that occurred on Shabbat? Omar Rav Levi bar Lachma, Omar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina. Katuv echad omer, the Torah said in Leviticus 23, Shabbaton zichron Torah, which means that Rosh Hashanah, the blowing, it's only the day that is remembrance of Teruah. Katuv echad omer, another pasuk said in the book of Bamidbar chapter 29, Yom Teruah Elachem is a day that you hear the Teruah, the staccato of the shofar. So how you reconcile the two sentences? They say Lokashia, kan yom tov shechal yot b'Shabbat, kan yom tov shechal yot b'chol. So the reason we have two different psukim in the Torah is one applies in the Yom Tov that occur on Shabbat, and the other is the during the days. So you really blow the shofar. So you see here, even you don't see it clearly from those lines, that you differentiate between Shabbat and the Chol, but you derive indirectly that if Rosh Hashanah occurred on Shabbat, you do not blow the shofar. Rava challenged that, and he said, if you tell me that this din of blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah that occurred on Shabbat, you learn from these psukim and it's biblical, how come they did it in the Beit HaMikdash? Ve'od, another to that, halav melachai ditzterich, is not considering one of the 39 type of work that prohibited on Shabbat, that you need to bring a clear statement, you cannot do it on Shabbat. The Tana de Shmuel, kol melechet avodah lo tasu. So we said clearly in the Torah that Tosfot said that pasuk apply on Yom Tov, yatzat ke'at shofar udiyat apad, she chokhma ben hamelacha. That's not applied to what? To a sound of shofar and removal of the bread from the oven, which was a skill and not a labor. So here the Tosfot elaborate and said, even lechatchila, you can do it, but then he said, in other words, if it's a fully baked, but otherwise it's lisha, is the issue. If you go biblically, it's fine, but you have the rabbinic decree, what happened is, that's very important, the rabbinic decree. It says, everyone is obligated to hear the shofar, but not everyone is erudite to understand all the halachic requirement involved with the shofar. So here is the gzera, called gzera, shema itlen biyado ilech etzela baki b'reshut harabim ve'avinu 400 b'reshut harabim. Someone is very impetuous, he needs to do it, and he doesn't know clearly how to do it, and all of a sudden he needs to do it. So he go and he carries it 4 cubit, that is violation, doing the Shabbat that is prohibited, and go to an expert and ask him to teach him quickly how to blow the shofar properly. So therefore he's in violation, so we don't do it. The same applied to what? To the caring for species on Shabbat, and the same applied to the Megillah. The Purim occurred on Shabbat. So all these three, the same thing. So Tosfot asked a question, so how about why you don't speak about deliver from the private to public domain? And he explained that that's Chashash Rachok, that's very far away. The same Tosfot you have here and the tractate Beitzah. Anyway, when the temple is destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai put a decree that what? that you blow the shofar in any place, you have a bad din. תנו רבנן, פעם אחת חל ראש השנה להיות בשבת. One time when the Sanhedrin, after the destruction of the temple, they moved to the city of Yavne. And it happens, listen carefully to that story, Rosh Hashanah occurred on Shabbat. והיו כל בני הערים מתכנסים. So everyone around the city of Yavne get together in that city. And by the way, Siftei Chacham said that that's happened first time after destruction that Rosh Hashanah occurred on Shabbat. Here is the problem. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lebnei Beitera. Bnei Beitera was the descendants of Bnei Beitera. That was they live about 100 years after destruction, but it's basically the people who are very erudite. So he asked them, Nitka? Amru lo nadun. He says, okay, so what's the rule? It's Shabbat today. Should we blow the shofar here in Yavne? We don't have Beit HaMikdash or not? We still hold this decree that a person may carry in a public domain or not? So they said, let's have a session, a court session. So he answered them, that typical Israeli. What did he say to them? Amar lahem nitka v'achar kach nadun. What did he say? Let's first blow the shofar and then have a discussion. You know, I wish that every board meeting the president will do that. Let's make things happen and then let's have a discussion, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, in Israel you see it a lot of times. So it was Choma Migdal when they built the state of Israel. What they do, they went top of the mountain, some settlement does that. Go on the night, boom, you build it, right? The next thing, let's have a discussion now. They already live there, right?
That's great.
Anyway, so they said there is a book called Tu'e Even. He said that there is a Gemarrah in Eruvin, Samechet, 68, that the Gemarrah said that when it's come to rabbinic decree, you do and then ask. Anyway, לאחר שדקו, אמרו לו, so they did it. They blow the shofar and then they have a discussion. נדון. So they said, okay, let's have a discussion, not for us now, but in the future. אמר להם, no, כבר נשמעה קרן ביבנה ואין משיבים לאחר מעשה. He says, it's too late. Already people know that in Yavne, the centerpiece of Jewish learning, they already blow the shofar on Shabbat. It's too late. It makes no sense to have discussion now for the future. It's over. So, Tkiat shofar is Ikar Yomi, is the essence of the day. So, you hear the call shofar, the same as Yerushalayim. Omar Rabbi Elazar לא התקנה רבי יוחנן בן זכאי אלא ביבנה בלבד. Rabbi Elazar challenged us and he said, wait, what he did is applied to the city of Yavne. אמרו לו אחד יבנה ואחד לכל מקום שיהיה בדין. No, it's every place you have בדין. אמרו לו היינו תנא קמא, so that's what the תנא קמא said. The first one, he said, Ika benayu, בית דינה דאקראי. You have sometimes a temporary beit din, not something that's permanent. Of this type, so the big question deeper down the road is the question of, do we still hold this gzeirah of carry 4 cubits? So basically, if you have beit din, the notion is that a person, average person, afraid, he have that fear of the beit din, or he remember. So therefore, it's kind of open the door for leniency. Anyway. אמרו לו, אחד יבנה בכל המקום של בית דין, it makes no different location, as long as you have בית דין there. אמר רב הונא, page 30, ואם בית דין, which means, and they will sound the shofar on Shabbat with the בית דין, מהי ואם בית דין? בפני בית דין, לאפוקי שלא בפני דין דלא. If it's not in the presence of the בית דין, even you are in the place that you can blow the shofar, but that's applied in the presence of the beit din, so they warn person not to violate Shabbat. But the Ran said otherwise, it's different. People doesn't have that notion, that fear of violation. מטיב רבא וזאת הייתה ירושלים רתרה על יבנה, מהי ועוד זאת? What does that mean in addition? אלא מקדקדי התני. זאת מבעלי אולי בירושלים תוקים יחידים וליבנה הם תוקים יחידים. ירושלים, you can do it in a singular and individual. And ביבנה, only the emissary of the beit din. וביבנה תוקים יחידים, they don't do it individually. כי עתה רב יצחק בר יוסף, when he came from ארץ ישראל to Babylon, אמר כי מסיים שליח ציבור רבון, שליח ציבור דוואן to blow the shofar. ראש השנה דתקו שבת complete, כי ביבנה לא שמע איניש קל אוני מקל תוקעה ידי חידאי. So, in other words, this is an example that everyone did it. It was so much noise. So, אל עליו, בירושלים תוקים בין בזמן בדין, בין שלא בזמן בדין. בירושלים, they do it regardless if you have a court session or not, up to the חצות, the דין הממונות or not. So they said, ביבנה בזמן בדין אין. When they have a present of בדין, they did it. שלא בזמן בדין, לא. So it means, after חצות, after the day, ביבנה they didn't blow the shofar. בזמן בדין מיד תוקין, but if they have a bedin, they can do it in Yavne, ואפילו שלא bedin, when that's disputed what Rav Huna said. He said, no, it's not correct. אילו ירושלים תוקין בין לפני דין ושלא בפני דין. ירושלים they go regardless. וביבנה בפני בדין אין, שלא בפני בדין לא. So that's match what Rav Huna say. קדמת לרב Huna, I apologize in advance. We have to reach the siyum, as we said, so we need to go quicker. So the Chtiv, they said in regard to Yom Kippur that occurred in the Jubilee year, the Torah said in Leviticus chapter 25, ביום הכיפורים תביאו שופר בכל ארציכם. So מלמד שכל יחיד ויחיד חייב לתקוע, that's an obligation to every individual. אומר רב הונא ואם בדין, מאי, ואם בדין בזמן בדין, which means up to the חצות, they blow the shofar, individual, the time of the court session of the בדין, להפוג יש לו בזמן בדין, זה לא. That one individual cannot do it. מה תברא את קהת ראש שנה ויובל דוחה את השבת בגבולין, איש וביתו. When it's blow the shofar, good morning. And Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur in the Jubilee year, it supersedes the Shabbat in places outside of the temple, applied to a person in his household, מה איש וביתו. What does that mean? אילא מה איש ואשתו, husband and wife, like we said in the beginning of Yoma. So Ite Tamim Mechaiva, she is a mitzvah של זמן גרמה, it's the time code, she's not obligated. והמצווה של זמן גרמה, היא בכל מצווה של זמן גרמה אנשים פתוחות, אלא איש בביתו, ואפילו שלא בזמן בדין. So that's the spirit what Rav Huna said, לא לעולם בזמן בדין. Otherwise, you follow the Rav Huna. כתיב רב ששת, שווה יובל לראש שנה לתקיעה ולברכות, אלא שביובל דוקים בבית דין שקידשו את החודש, which is the Sanhedrin, בין בית דין שלא קידשו את החודש, which is the בית דין to every city. וכל יחיד ויחיד חייב לתקוע, every individual have to blow the shofar. ובראש השנה, when ראש השנה occurred on שבת, והיו תוקים לבית דין שקידשו בית החודש, which is the great Sanhedrin, that's follow Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah. בין כל יחיד ויחיד חייב לתקוע, מה אם כל יחיד ויחיד חייב לתקוע? אילה, מה דביובל תקוקים יחידים, ובראש השנה הם תוקים יחידים, only the emissary of the בית דין. והקריאת רבי יצחק בר יוסף אמר, כי אבל מסיים שליח הציבור עד תקיעת, when the שליח ציבור finish blowing the shofar on ראש השנה, that occurred שבת, ביבנה לא שמע איש קלולה, מקל תוקע דיחד, that's what we said earlier. אלא לאו, דילו ביובל תוקים בין מזמן בדין, בין מזמן שלא בדין, which is before חצות, but after the חצות, ובראש שנה בזמן בדין אין, שלא בזמן בדין לא. And according to that, קטנה מיד ביובל בין מזמן בדין, בין מזמן שלא בדין, and then disputed what Rav Huna said. So we said לא לעולם בזמן בדין, ואחרי קטנה ביובל בזמן בדין תוקים individual בין בפני בדין, בין שלא בפני בדין. בראש שנה תוקים individual, blow the shofar בזמן בדין ובפני בדין. So what we learn in the brighter day, each individual not have the obligation to blow the shofar, it means that he can blow the shofar only at the presence of the bed din. Itman amar Gamda Rabbi Yosef ben Shulam Rabbi, and tokim individual cannot blow the shofar at the Jubilee year on Yom Kippur, ela bezman shebedin yoshvim. So now we have a quandary that by Rab Zera nin'aru la'amod v'lo amdu, which means if they stood from the place to go and they still not when the individual can do that at that time or not. Why? Bedin Yushvin Bainan Va'ika, because you have the court session and they still not go back to the home, or Dilma, since he cannot blow the shofar, Zman Bedin Bainan Va'leika, because they not any longer in the court session of the Bedin, so therefore a person cannot do it. So the take we left it in the unresolved problem. We just go to the Mishnah. Another thing, Yerushalayim, an additional superior to Yavne, so they said that any city can come close, can come and hear Ro'ah, prat liyoshevet banachal. So that's a exclusive city that is in deep valley from which one can hear but cannot see Yerushalayim from afar. Shomat prat liyoshevet b'rosh hahar, krova prat liyoshevet chutz hatchum. Here that's one apply so high. So you can see Yerushalayim, but you cannot hear the sound of the shofar. So therefore you cannot blow there. Or krova, excluding that it's exceeded the 2,000 cubit from Yerushalayim. V'yichola lavo prat lemafsik lenahara. If it's any river in between, so you cannot go to Yerushalayim on Shabbat, so therefore you don't blow the shofar there. 589, we talk about the intent. One who sounds the shofar for an individual must have the intent to discharge his obligation. If one is sounding the shofar for a congregation, it is assumed that he has intent to discharge the obligation of anyone who hears him sounding the shofar. Therefore, if one passes by the synagogue or is sitting in a house or apartment that close to and hear the sound of the representative of the community, if he has intent to fulfill his obligation, he fulfill it. We talk also about cheresh otev katan, people who are incapable, like deaf, mute, minor, etc. So they have the issue, since they're not obligated, they cannot exempt. So who is obligated to hear the shofar? So that's the halacha. Everyone needs to hear it, and the Rambam give us, follow this, all the list in Ilchot Shofar chapter 2. We talk about Hotzaat Achrim Midei Chovat Brachot. So that's Rambam Ilchot Brachot chapter 1. The halacha with regard to a blessing, that even one who has already recited the blessing and had fulfilled his obligation may recite it for others who have not yet fulfilled the obligation. So, for example, we said a blessing for Kiddush. You go on Friday nights to senior home and you do it for them. So blessing of enjoyment that are not attached to the mitzvah are an exception to this rule. One may not bless for others unless he has partaken of the enjoyment himself. However, with regard to blessings of enjoyment that are attached to a mitzvah, such as eating matzah on Pesach or reciting Kiddush on Shabbat and festival, one can recite a blessing for others although he is not eating with them. So again, you go to do this mitzvah for others, you go in your home, you do that, you make a Kiddush for them, etc. You can do it again and again, repetition. In general, blessing on behalf of others, that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 1667. He said, one who is not eating is prohibited for reciting enjoyment for blessing for others, even if they do not know how to recite the blessing themselves. However, he can recite the blessing for children, even if they are not of his household, in order to educate them to perform the mitzvot. That's the Tazim Bet Yosef. If the children know how to pronounce the name of Hashem themselves, he should begin pronunciation each name and allow the children to complete them. The same should be done with adults who do not know how to recite the blessing, and unfortunately we see it all the time. We talk about Rosh Hashanah that occurred on Shabbat, that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 588. So when Rosh Hashanah occurred on Shabbat, the shofar is not sounded. In this case, the shofar is considered to be muktzeh, set aside, and may not be moved. Now, we talk also a halachot in a ridiyat apat. So that's a Rambam Ilchot Shabbat chapter 22. Removing bread from an oven is not a prohibition labor on Shabbat. However, the sages prohibited this action lest one come to bake. So again, that's Gzeirat Chachamim. Since we said that when Rosh Hashanah occurred on Shabbat, they would sound the shofar only in the place of the rabbinic court, that the Rambam said in Chot Shofar chapter 2, in the presence of the court while they are still in session. Otherwise, they don't do that. We talk about women a little bit. So that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 589. Women are exempt from sounding the shofar, although they are permitted to sound it for themselves and to recite the blessing, right? But one who has already fulfilled his obligation to sound the shofar is permitted to sound it for women, and even they carry the shofar to a public domain for this purpose. That's Shulchan Aruch Harav. However, one who sounds the shofar exclusively for women have an issue with that. That's Shulchan Aruch, the Rema, to do the blessing for them, because again, that's the idea of someone who's not obligated versus someone who's obligated.
ויחם לשולוים מלאכי השולוים מלאכי